Good evening. Good evening, everybody. Today, I will explain in detail about the intelligence, mainly the emotional intelligence and the aptitude, and how to measure the intelligence. So, this part is also very important in this unit. Um, to cover this intelligence and mainly the emotional intelligence. Um, in this unit we have the definition of intelligence, the measuring intelligence, then the influence of nurture and nurture of intelligence, nature and nurture of intelligence, as well as the approaches to intelligence. It includes the psychometric approach and the cognitive approach. Whereas the individual differences, why it happens in intelligence, it is another important point of this unit. And the concept of emotional intelligence also, it includes the models of emotional intelligence, the factors contributing to this emotional intelligence. And after this unit, the aptitude, the next unit will cover the aptitude, the definition of aptitude, and what are the main factors of aptitude. So to start with this unit, that is intelligence. Now, what is intelligence? Intelligence is one of those concepts which is easier to recognize than to define. Why? Because it is very difficult to give precise definitions of intelligence, because we cannot see the intelligence from the performance of the of any person or any children. We can say that yes, he or she is an intelligent person. So defining this intelligence, actually psychologists are yet to agree on single definitions of intelligence. Why? There are various types of intelligence, and different psychologists, they have defined according to their own factors that what is intelligence. To define with the most some of the most important definitions, like it is the aggregate or global capacity of an individual to think rationally, to act purposefully, and to deal effectively with the environment. Now, several other psychologists like Levi Starman, like Howard Gardner, they also tried to define intelligence in their own way. Now, intelligence is a important factor of a human being, and how it can be measured. That means the measuring of intelligence. Now, this concept of measurement of intelligence, it started when educators in France, they attempted to identify the children who were unable to learn as quickly or as well as others in school. Now, the famous Alfred Binet testing of intelligence with his colleagues, or Theodore Simon, he designed the test of intelligence, and that distinguished fast learners and slow learners, etc. Then Binet Simon's famous intelligence test in 1916, and they gave the concept of mental age, that is the abbreviated as MA. Now, what does this mental age means? It is a measure of person's intellectual development relative to people of his or her age group, and of his or her age group. Now, the concept of measurement of intelligence started when educators in France, they attempted to identify the children who were unable to learn quickly in the school, or who are the slow learners. Now, according to several tests, they find that the famous concept of mental age. Now, mental age is a measure of person's intellectual development relative to people of his or her age group. And a mental age of 8 means that a child's performance on an intelligence test equals the average performance level of a group of 8 years old. Now, this is the mental age. Now, another important thing is the chronological age. That means the age of that child. Now, mental age, it means as the intellectual development, how that person actually performs his other type of activities, and that is the mental age. While the actual age, the biological age of the person or the child is the chronological age. Now, the mental age is calculated on the level of individuals' answer to the questions, which are ranked according to the age of an individual. Now, mental age, it indicates nothing about whether the intelligence of the individual is high or low in comparison to other people. Now, the famous intelligent quotient was developed, that is the IQ, and this concept was devised by William Stern in 1912 and Terman in 1916. We know that the Binet scale or the Stanford Binet scale, it is a very important test of intelligence, and the intelligence quotient is abbreviated as IQ. It refers to the mental age, that is MA, divided by the chronological age, that is the CA, and multiplied by 100. Now, multiplying by 100 helps to avoid the decimal, as it changes the IQ into the whole number. Now, this IQ then equals to the mental age by the chronological age multiplied by 100. So, this is the main concept of measuring this intelligence, and this is the definition of mental age, the chronological age, and how this IQ can be calculated. Now, the next portion is the how this distribution of this IQ scores happen. Like the in the frequency distribution for the IQ score, it tends to approximate a normal distribution. Why? Because in a bell-shaped normal probability curve, the where the 100 lies in the middle portion, that means the 85 minus 85 degree sigma on the left side, and 115 or 115 on the right hand side. And the if we plot the IQ scores of large number of people on a graph, then it assumes the shape of the normal distribution curve, or otherwise it is known as bell shaped curve that I told you. So the distribution of IQ scores in the form of normal distributions are can be shown, and the IQ scores are distributed in such a manner that the majority of the individual scores tend to fall in the middle range of the distribution, and only a few people have either very high or very low IQ scores in the range. Like the range is 90 to 110, and those individuals having an IQ score above 130 are considered as exceptionally talented person, or they may be intellectually gifted. And whereas the IQ below 70 may mean that the person may have mental retardation or some intellectual disability. So these two groups, the intellectually gifted and the intellectually disabled, they deviate from the normal population with respect to their cognitive, emotional, and the motivational characteristics. Now, after this, this is the scoring part of the IQ mainly. So we can easily classify, or according to the classification of people on the basis of the IQ, the IQ range above 130 is known as the very superior, and 120 to 130, they are the superior persons. Then the scores of 110 to 119, they are high average, whereas 90 to 109, they are average group. whereas 80 to 89 are low average and 70 to 79 are the borderline, and below 70 are the mentally retarded and the intellectually disabled. So this is the classification of the people on the basis of their IQ. Then comes the influence of nature and nurture of on intelligence. That means the effect of the heredity, the effect of the environment. It mainly differs. The intelligence can be differed according to the nurture of the child and also according to the environmental factors. That means in which situation the child is growing. Now there are some evidence for the influence of nature, like there are some research works which shows that the heredity plays an important role in the human intelligence, whereas there are some family studies to show this. The twin studies were conducted, and adoption studies where it was found the famous the Bryan brothers experiment. They were two tennis players, and these twin studies have shown that the identical twins have high mean of correlation between their IQ scores, that is maybe plus point 0.86, and there are some important differences also which are find out from the research. Now, next, the family studies. It means the researchers have also measured the IQ with respect to some family relationship, and the number of studies have attempted to assess the similarity of the IQ between different groups or relatives. And if heredity influences intelligence, then we would expect that the more closely two persons are related, the more similar their IQs will be. Now, this is the family studies. Then comes the adoption studies. Now, this adoption studies, there lie support for the impact of some heredity and the intelligence is provided by the research studies involving the adopted children. Now, it tries to compare the adopted children with both their biological and the adoptive parents. So there are some find outs like IQs. Then the IQ scores are more highly correlated with their biological parents, whereas IQs then with their adopted parents. Now IQs, and so a long term study results reveal that the correlation between the adopted children's intelligence and their biological parents increased over time. Then another factor is heritability, where the reasons of heredity are very important for the intelligence or for the score of the high score of the in IQ. So after that, the another important factor is the evidence for the influence of nurture. Now, what are the evidences? They are re-looking at twin studies and adoption studies, and the flying effect. What is that flying effect means? That means the evidence that environmental factors can have influence on human intelligence was reported by Flyen in 1987. Now, his research evidence showed that there is a rapid rise in the individual's average performance on IQ test in several Western countries in the recent decades. So this was an important research the by which we can find these factors like the fly-in effect. Then comes the environmental deprivation and enrichment. Now, there is evidence that environmental deprivation lowers the intelligence, which rich nutrition, quality schooling, and good family background increases the intelligence, and children from households in poverty have lower IQs than do children from the households with more resources, etc. Now, these are some of the findings. Now, biological influences is another important factor, where this additional support for the influence of environmental factors in intelligence is provided by research findings on biological factors. Then, many biological factors that the individual encounter while growing up can affect their intelligence. Now, the next important part of this is the approaches to intelligence. Now, what are the approaches? The most important approaches to intelligence is the psychometric approach. Now, what is this psychometric approach means? Now, the question of whether the intelligence is a single characteristics or a collective one, that means collection of some specific abilities, is hard to answer. So, this may be partly due to the fact that it involves intellectual capacities that we cannot see directly. So, we can only infer it from individuals' observable surface behavior, such as the intellectual tests, and the psychometric approach. They considers the intelligence as an aggregate of abilities and expresses the individual performances. So, this type of approaches we have already seen in while we define the intelligence. Now, to define this psychometric approach, Charles E. Spearman in 1927, he was a British psychologist. So his famous psychometric theories, we can find that he proposed a two-factor theory of intelligence, and this Spearman used a specific statistical techniques, which is known as factor analysis, and concluded that intelligence consists of two factors. What are they? The general factor, or the small g factor, and the specific factor, that is the small s factor. Now, this G factor, it includes the mental operations which are primarily and common to all performances requiring intelligence, whereas the second factor, the S factor, is specifically related to each particular test. Now, so these are the important factors defined by the two factor theory by Charles E. Spearman. Now, after that, E.L. Thurstone in 1938, he proposed the theory of primary mental ability, in which he analyzed that the intercorrelation of a set of 56 mental tests and identified seven factors. Now, what are these seven factors? They are the verbal comprehension, the verbal fluency, the numerical ability, the spatial ability, the inductive reasoning, memory, and last, the perceptual speed. Now, this was the famous Thirdstone's theory. Now, then, after that, Raymond Cattell in 1963, he used the factor analysis technique to show that general intelligence can be divided into two relatively independent components. Now, they are number one, the crystallized intelligence, and number two, the fluid intelligence. Now, what is this crystallized intelligence mean? It is the type of intelligence which consists of the knowledge a person has already acquired and the ability to use that knowledge whenever required. Whereas this fluid ability are the reasoning and the problem solving abilities. That means which are measured by the test as analogies, classifications, series completions, etc. So, these crystallized abilities include the vocabulary, general information, and knowledge about some specific fields. Now, after Raymond Cattell in 1963, Arthur Jensen 1969, he proposed a hierarchical model of intelligence. Now, which consists of some abilities operating at two levels. Now, one is level 1 and another is level 2. Now, what is this level 1 ability? It is the ability, or the level 1 ability is called as associative learning. Why? Because it consists of rote memory and rote learning, in which the output is more or less similar to the input. Whereas the level 2 is called as the cognitive learning, so which involves higher order skills such as the abstract thinking and the symbolic thought. Now, after this, this is the psychometric approach. Now, after this approach, there is another type of approach, that is the cognitive approach. Now, this cognitive approach means it is actually an alternative approach in understanding the concept of intelligence, as was taken by many theorists and who focused mainly on the intellectual processes, and that is the pattern of thinking, the memory, the perception, etc. So, in this cognitive approach, important psychologists like Robert Sternberg in 1985, he mainly emphasizes the importance of these cognitive processes in problem solving. His model of information processing consisted of mainly three types of components. What are they? Number one, the knowledge acquisition component. Number two, the performance component. And number three, the cognitive components. Now, according to this theory, there are three basic types of intelligence. Now, that means the componential or analytic intelligence. Number two, the experiential or creative intelligence, which actually focuses on the insight and the ability to formulate any new ideas. And the contextual or the practical intelligence, it actually emphasizes on the ability to deal with any environmental demands faced during day-to-day affairs. Now, after this important theory by Robert Sternberg, the next important psychologist like Howard Gardner in 1983, he believed that this intelligence is not a single entity. That means he said that it consists of numerous abilities, each of which is equally important. Now, he described different types of intelligence concerning the following ability, like linguistic, number one, number two, logical or mathematical ability, number three, spatial ability, number four, musical ability, five, the bodily or kinesthetic ability, then interpersonal ability, intrapersonal ability, the naturalistic ability, and lastly, the existential ability. So, he defined that there are 9 different types of intelligence. So, according to the processes of intelligence. Now, after him, J.P. Das and J. Nagrelli and Kirby in 1994, they said that planning, attention arousal, simultaneous and successive, that means it is abbreviated as PASS model, has been developed by them in 1994. And according to this model, human cognitive processes, they involve three functional units of brain. So, what are they? Number one, the first function unit is responsible for any type of arousal or attention. Number two, or the second functional unit, is involved in analyzing anything or coding and storing information using simultaneous and successive processes, etc. And the next one, or the third important function according to them, was the planning or self monitoring and structuring of the cognitive abilities. Now, after this famous theory, the individual differences in intelligence, it is another important part of this unit. Now, intelligence has significant implications for our everyday life, and it influences our effective functioning, that we have already seen. So, this intelligence is assessed in terms of IQ scores, and we also know that there is a fixed range of IQ according to the normal distribution curve, and we can easily group the persons according to their score of intelligence. And we know that the gifted, the score of the gifted, or the IQ score of the gifted, the longitudinal study of 1538 on children, it was a very important experiment where the IQ tests were conducted on 130 children. And uh, in Torrance 1993 study, they have also found that other factors such as high energy level, or persistence, or sense of purpose in life, etc., to play a role in the various life outcomes of gifted people. Now, the next one is the intellectual disability that is marked by an extreme low IQ of 70 or below. Now, the next part is important because emotional intelligence, it is another important ability to recognize the emotions in oneself and the others, and how to manage the emotions in an effective way. Now, the concept of this emotional intelligence uh, was first introduced by Salovey and Mayer in 1990, and it was later popularized and expanded upon by Daniel Goleman in 1995, and with the publication of his famous book, that is the Emotional Intelligence. Then it is actually defined as the ability to monitor one's own and others' feelings and emotions, to discriminate among them, and to use this information to guide one's thinking and actions. Now, it also refers to the capacity to reason about the emotions and the emotional information, and thereby to enhance thought. Now, this emotional intelligence is often described as the capacity to be aware of, or control and express one's emotion, and also to handle interpersonal relationship empathetically. Now, this emotional intelligence, there are some fixed models of this emotional intelligence. There are different scientific approaches to emotional intelligence, like the ability model. It views the emotional intelligence as a standardized intelligence. Then the trait model, it encompasses the behavioral dispositions and self perceived abilities, and is measured through self report questionnaire. That means the respondents can report um, on their own. And the next part is the mixed model, where why it is mixed, that means the ability or the conception with personality traits, and the competencies such as optimism, self-esteem, and emotional self-efficacy. Then the next part is the Myers and Solvey's model of emotional intelligence. Now, this ability based model views emotions as useful sources of information that help one to make sense and navigate the social environment. So, this model claims that emotional intelligence, it includes four types of abilities. They are: number one, the perception of emotion; number two, the use of emotion to facilitate thinking; number three, 3, understanding and analyzing emotion. And number 4, the relative regulation of emotions. Now, after this, the Goldman's theory of emotional intelligence, it states that uh, there are 5 essential components of emotional intelligence. What are they? The self-awareness, the self-regulation, the motivation, the empathy, and the social skills. So these are the famous 5 important essential components of emotional intelligence by Goldman's theory of emotional intelligence. Now, the factors contributing to this emotional intelligence are people. They born with all the emotional intelligence they will ever have or does experience affects their development. Now, the main factors that we have already covered in this theory. So, in this unit, we have seen that the definitions of intelligence, what is mental age, what is chronological age, how IQ can be measured, what are the tables or the scores according to the classification of the scores, how the intelligence can be measured, etc. Now, in the next unit, that is the unit 4, the theories of intelligence, that means the all we have already covered the Spearman's two-factor theory, the third stone theory of intelligence. The next one is the Guilford structure of intellect theory. Now in this chapter, we it is only we can see that the important theories of intelligence are mentioned, and the third stones theory we have already seen that it mainly covers the famous factors or the important factors that is responsible for the primary mental abilities, or it is known as PMA. Now, they are number 1, the inductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning means the ability to find rules or the logical reasoning ability. Then, the memory. Memory means the ability to memorize anything or to recall anything. And then comes the numerical ability. The numerical ability, it actually is the ability to solve any problem or any type of arithmetical problem or numerical problem, and with accuracy and speed. And next comes the perceptual speed, that means the ability to visualize details rapidly. Then the spatial relationship, that means the ability to understand the relationship between the others. And the verbal comprehension, it is the ability of reading any comprehension or defining anything. Whereas the last one is the word fluency, that means the ability to produce words rapidly, that is to use words quickly and fluently in performing the task like naming anything, naming word, rhyming, solving crossword, puzzles, etc. Now, after this, Guilford structure of intelligence, that is the SI theory. He was an American psychologist, and his theory is mainly developed by his famous content, operation, and product, the three-dimensional framework that he explained. And this um, operations means the cognition, memory, recording anything, memory recording or memory retention, then divergent production, convergent production, and obviously the evaluative or the evaluation part. Now, this products, it means or it includes the units, the classes, the relations, the systems, the transformation, and the implication. Whereas the contents, it means the visual, auditory, symbolic, semantic, and behavioral type. So these are the three main factors developed by this intelligence, and according to J.P. Guilford's, and it is known as structural or structure of intellect model. Now, the contents dimension, this contents dimension, it includes the broad areas of information to which the human intellect operations are applied. Now, there are five content dimensions according to this content dimension, and that is the visual, the auditory, the symbolic, the semantic, and the behavioral. Now, these operations, as the name suggests, it means or it covers the cognition, the memory recording, the memory retention capacity, the divergent production, convergent production, evaluation, etc. Now the products dimension, that is the another dimension. This mainly contains the results of applying particular operations to specific content, and it includes, there are six kinds of these products in increasing complexity, like they are units, number one, number two, classes, then relations, then systems, then transformations, and lastly the implications. Now from this we can see that what are the main theories of this intelligence. The next important theory of intelligence was described by Raymond Cattell. He was a British psychologist, and he proposed two types of intelligence. That means the crystallized intelligence and the fluid intelligence, that we have already covered in the previous unit. Now, this Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence, we can find that Howard Gardner in 1983, he was an American psychologist. So, in his famous book Frames of Mind, he has beautifully described about the the one form of cognition which cut across the all human thinking. And he said that the multiple intelligence, it mainly are, number one, the musical, the kinesthetic, the spatial, naturistic, existential, interpersonal, intrapersonal, linguistic, and logical. So these are the multiple intelligence described by him. Now, this includes all type of intelligence, and the after this, the famous Sternberg's hierarchical theory of intelligence, we can find that Robert Jeffrey Sternberg, in 1949, he was an American psychologist, and he is a new generation cognitive psychologist who attempt to understand the cognitive processes involved in solving problem. And Sternberg, according to Sternberg, he defined that human intelligence as the cognitive ability to learn from experience, to reason well, to remember important informations, etc. Now, Sternberg in 1988, he formulated this triarchic theory of intelligence. Now, this triarchy means three. Number one, the component or the analytical intelligence. Number two, the experiential or the creative intelligence, whereas the number three is the contextual or the practical intelligence. Now, this famous triarchic theory, this componential subtheory, it consists of the meta components, the performance, the knowledge acquisition. Then the experiential subtheory, it consists of the novelty and the automation. Whereas the last one, that is the contextual subtheory, it carries, or it actually consists of the adaptation, selection, and shaping. Now, after this important theory, the next important theory is the PASS theory of intelligence. Now, PASS means capital P, capital A, capital S, S. That means we have already seen the planning, arousal, attention, simultaneous and successive processing. It was developed by J.P. Das and Grelly and Kirby, 1994. And in his famous theory, this planning means it is the frontal one. Then after planning, the simultaneous and successive, that means it occurs in the occipital, parietal, and the temporal lobe of brain. Then the next one is the arousal or attention, where the brain stem and the limbic system are the main center of this arousal and attention, described in this theory by J.P. Das in this past theory. And the other important factors of this intelligence, we can see the cross cultural conceptions of intelligence, where cultural studies have pointed out the cultural differences in the way the intellectual abilities are reflected. And there are various experiments on urban compartments and as well as rural compartments. And so various researches were developed, and by which this cognitive competence, it includes, we have seen, it includes the aspects like the planning anything or any decision making procedure, or sensitivity to context, reflection, and also in communication. Now, this is all about the theories of intelligence. It is a very important unit for examination purpose, because these intelligence is very common, and often these type of questions are there in the exam. Now after this, the another part is the assessment part of this intelligence. Now how this assessment is done, that means there are some history of assessments of intelligence, like Binet Simon scale, like revised scale, and advent of IQ. Then the tests are divided according to the individual test and the group test. And again, the test can be divided into the verbal and the non-verbal test. Now, this historical part, it actually consists of how this type of test actually came into existence, and what are the who are they who actually done this research work on this particular field. And we have already seen the Binet Simon, the famous Binet Simon scale. It was the first intelligence test done in 1904, and by Binet and Simon. They were the Alfred Binet and Simon, and to develop the measure of identify the children's according to their average intelligence. Then these type of tests were revised again and again, and there were 30 problems measuring variety of functions there. And these tests are developed for particular age groups. Then again, this type of revised scale and the advent of IQ in was developed, and there were some changes were done on these type of tests. And the standardized this test was again standardized on about 300 children of 3 to 13 years of age. So this is how the historical part of intelligence assessment techniques were developed. Now, the types of intelligence according to the individual and the group, like the intelligence test based on the mode of adjustment, we can classify the intelligence test into individual and group. Whereas, according to the nature of the test item, we can classify the intelligence into three: the verbal, non-verbal, and performance. Now, what is this individual test? It mainly covers the Stanford Binet scale of intelligence, where Binet and Simon in 1905, 1908, then again in 1911. Then again, it was translated by Tarman in 1916, and this in 1905 Binet Simon scale. It consists of simple 30 items. Then in 1908, again this Binet Simon it comments or develops, introduce the mental age concept. Then in 1911, again it was expanded to include the adults. So in this way, this revision was takes place, and the last revision was done in 2003, and it was revision. It is known as revision 5. That means where the 5 factors of intelligence were described here, and the SBF model of intelligence, the next part of that is a fifth edition or the final revision of intelligence test. It consists of 10 subtests for assessing the intellectual and the cognitive abilities. It assesses 5 cognitive factors. What are they? Number one, fluid reasoning, knowledge, quantitative reasoning, visual spatial processing, and working memory. So each cognitive factor is measured by 2 subtests. And the earlier versions of the Stanford Binet were yielding a composite IQ. Hmm. So these were about this SB5 model of this intelligence, the last version of the Binet Simon scale. Now, after that, the famous Wechsler scale was developed, and there were 3 scales: one designed for adults, one for school age children, and one for the preschool children. So, these scales are used as measures of general intelligence. At the same time, they are also useful in psychiatric diagnosis. Now, this initially this Wechsler was interested in developing a scale to measure intelligence in adults, and he went through the then available scales. He realized that in these tests, particularly in the Stanford Binet, the test items were not suitable for adults, so there were some limitations of the previous test. So that means the test items were not suitable for adults. Number two, the manipulation of words were overemphasized. Then three, speed of performance was emphasized. Then mental age norms that were used were not relevant to the adult testing. So likewise there were some limitations. So these were the lights were on these limitations. The famous Wechsler scale was set up, and instead of using the usual formula, this mental age by chronological age, he invented a new age relative formula. What is that? The IQ equals to attained or actual score divided by the expected mean score for age. Then again, it was revised in 1955, and it was known as the Wechsler's Adult Intelligence Scale, WAIS. Then again, another scale was introduced or prepared, that is for only for children. It is known as WISC in 1949. Then so these are the important revision of this Wechsler scale, and this IQ test or the intelligence test, it actually all the Wechsler scale consist of number of verbal and performance subtests. So some of the subtests are core test and others are supplemental. Like the subtests together are the verbal IQ score and the performance IQ and the full IQ score. So full IQ score, it can be classified into the verbal IQ and the performance IQ. Now verbal IQ, it can be again classified into verbal comprehension index and working memory index, whereas this performance IQ may be classified into the perceptual organization and the processing speed index. Now, this perceptual organization index may be again divided into the picture, completion, number one, block design, matrix, reasoning, etc. Whereas the speed index, it includes the digit symbol coding, the symbol search, etc. Whereas this verbal comprehension, it means vocabulary, similarities, information comprehension, etc. So these were the subtests of this Wechsler scale, the famous Wechsler scale. So there are some general features of this Wechsler test, like common subtest for different ages. There are some three scales mostly used, like the WAIS 4, WISC, that is for children 5, and WPPSI 4. Now, the core subtests are vocabulary, information symbol search, block design, matrix reasoning, picture completion, comprehension, etc. Now, after this, the famous Kaufman scale, in Kaufman and Kaufman in 1980s and 1990s, they developed three scales which are individually administered. Now, these scales were designed to include developmentally appropriate tasks anchored in theories of intelligence. Now, the Kaufman Assessment Battery for Children (KABC) was introduced in 1983, is in line with the information processing theory of Das in 1984 and Luria in 1966. Now, test comprises of 7 tests of simultaneous processing and 3 subtests of sequential processing, and achievement scale consisting of 6 subtests. So these were the main process of this test. Now, Kaufman's adolescence and adult intelligence test is a measure of intelligence for ages 11 through 85 years. And this core battery and the expanded battery, there are 2 batteries mentioned in this KAIT, consist of 2 batteries. They are actually the core battery and the expanded battery. Now, they were mentioned as briefly as the mental status test, and the former is composed of the crystallized scale and the fluid scale, each having the 3 subtests. Now, this Kaufman's brief intelligence test was developed in 1990 again, and in 2004 is a quick screening measure for estimating the level of intellectual functioning in 4 to 90-year-olds. So it covers a high range of age group or chronological age. Now, then comes the famous Das-Nagreli cognitive assessment system, that is the DNCAS. So, it was published in late 1990s, and it is an individually administered instrument for assessing the cognitive processing. This test has its theoretical background in the past, that is the PASS model that we have already seen in Das-Nagreli and Kirby's research. And this CAS actually comprises several verbal as well as non-verbal subtests to measure 4 basic cognitive processes. What are they? The planning, the attention, the simultaneous processing, and the successive processing. So, this was all about the important individual test. Next comes the group test. Now, the group test is one that can be administered to more than one person at the same time. Now, there are some features of the group test as different from the individual test. What are they? Number one, the multiple choice versus the open ended format. Number two, quick and objective machine scoring versus examiner scoring. Then, group versus individualized administration and control of item difficulty. Whereas the application, that is the screening versus diagnosis and remedial planning, and Num- Number 6, very large versus not so large standardization sample. Now, obviously, there are some advantages and disadvantages of this group testing. Like, group testings are designed primarily for mass testing. Now, in group testing, examiner's role is simplified. On the other hand, the individual test like Stanford, Binet, or Bachelor, the examiner has to have extensive training for that. Then the scoring is more objective and simpler in this comparison to the individual test. And as it is easier to obtain large amount of data with group tests, they provide better established norms. Now, obviously, there are some disadvantages too. Like, since in group tests, the examiner has less opportunity to establish rapport with the examinees. In the group testing, they lacks flexibility, etc. And the invalid scores are difficult to be recognized in the group test. Now, there are some important examples of this group intelligence test. They are the multi-dimensional aptitude battery, that is MAB, was developed by Jackson in 1984. Then cognitive abilities test, that is the COG-80. It was developed by Lohman and Hagen in 2001. It is a group administered test, standardized and norm reference test. Then the next one is the culture fair intelligence test, that is the CFIT. It was developed by Cattle in 1940 and IPET in 1973, and it is a non-verbal measure of fluid intelligence, etc. Then the another important or number 4 test is a Raven's progressive matrices, that is the RPM. It was developed by Raven in 1938, then again in 1986, and in 1992 is a non-verbal test of inductive reasoning, originally designed to measure Spearman's factor, that is the two factors. Then this Ravens is actually constructed three different instruments. They are the colored progressive matrices for 5 to 11 children, 11-year-old children. Then standard progressive matrices in it was the next edition was developed in 1996, only for the age group 6 to 80 years, etc. Then after this, the verbal and the non-verbal test, they mainly verbal test means the name suggests is the one which language is required for the successful performance in it. And non-verbal tests are intelligence test or ability to analyze the visual information and solve problems without necessarily using words. So this is all about the verbal and non-verbal test. Then comes the culture fair test. It in 1910, Goddard was assigned the work of assessing this intelligence of immigrants of the Ellis Island, and he said that the usually cultures vary along the parameters like the language, like the reading experiences, the speed, the environmental experiences, etc. Now, typical culture fair instruments are the culture fair tests, the Raven's progressive matrices, that is the RPM, and the later International Performance Scale revised, that is the Royd and Miller in 1997, and Draw a Man test developed by Good Enough in 1926, and its revised version, the Good Enough Harris drawing test in 1963. Now, the issues in intelligence testing, it covers mainly the intelligence tests have been found to be useful in predicting mainly the academic achievement. Then there has been question raised with regard to the validity of the intelligence test. And also, the next, the intelligence is not limited to the IQ alone. That means the IQ test, it measures only the part of the overall competencies of a human being. Then there are some critics, they argue that most intelligence are biased against the certain groups, particularly those who vary from mainstream, that means the Western society. Then intelligence testing for infants and preschools has also been questioned for its sensitivity, for accuracy and predictive value. So this is all about the assessment part. So today I've covered the definition of intelligence, the methods of intelligence, the assessment techniques of intelligence, the emotional intelligence, and this famous part that it covers the mainly the what are the types of this intelligence assessment. So today, up to this. So this is a very important chapter of this unit, that is of this 103. So today, thank you for listening, everyone.